Alistair Burt.
Thank you, Secretary
Good morning,
of State.
Mr. Burt.
Good morning, Secretary of State. I could also pursue what Pat's been talking about, but we've discussed that quite a few times, so we'll leave that be. It will no doubt come back. I've got a couple of questions on migration, but before I do, can I just pick up something that both Jeremy and Dominic Raab said? My impression also, from visiting friends on the continent, is that the position is eased. You're right. A growing sense of the inevitability that we meant what we said in the referendum, or the referendum result was conclusive, has been apparent over the months. It started by people saying, oh, well, you're going to change this, aren't you? And now that's not the case, and therefore there's a different style. However, when we start the negotiations proper, sort of very shortly, the issue of the bill will be up there, the amount that we're being asked to pay and our views on that. The chance of rhetoric getting out of control at that stage is also very high. Could you assure us that you and colleagues will do everything in their power to ease down the rhetoric at that stage? We saw a couple of examples in the House yesterday. It's very easy, and the papers will pick it up and they'll make it much more. The papers and the media want a confrontation, and I think most of us don't want a confrontation. We think your style and what you're talking about is absolutely right, but careless rhetoric from senior colleagues, the wrong tweet, the wrong conversation, just scales it all up. Can you assure us that you will do everything in your power to make sure that colleagues keep the atmosphere that you're talking about, and that Donald Tusk, in one of his tweets
you will have noticed in the last 9 months I have not responded to any provocations on this matter. I suspect the principal challenge to my health in the next 2 years is having to be diplomatic. But you're right. It's very, very important that we ensure that the mood and temperature of our exchanges is controlled and, as far as possible, amicable. Now, there will be times, I say this as you're a practical man, I mean, there will be times when the negotiations will get tough, I'm sure. But tough does not mean spiteful, angry, whatever you want to choose. And I also start from another point, I should just say to the committee. I am not one of those who don't like the European project. I think for the other countries of Europe it's incredibly important. I think for the Eastern Europeans these days, incredibly important. It reflects their commitment to liberty, democracy, the rule of law and so on. And I start from an understanding that for them this is disappointing. And let's be plain about it. You know, our friends are disappointed we're leaving. Yeah. And so I allow a considerable amount of slack just off the back of that. But yes, I will continue to say to colleagues, keep this as calm as possible and as amicable as possible. Because we do, the last point that Mr. Tusk made in his tweet this morning, which, you know, one could have responded to, but the last point was we want to have amicable relations between the EU and the UK after this is over.
Absolutely right. I welcome what you said about the European project. Could I go on to migration? We were told when we first spoke to yourself and Mr. Robbins that there were 57 separate studies being carried out by the department on the impact of all this. What of those 57 studies around the UK, and I'm sure there's more now, around the UK, told the department about the value of migration to the UK economy, and how is that feeding into the process of negotiation?
Well, not yet, because negotiation hasn't started, but it's part of the reason that from about November onwards I started highlighting to people, look, this is not a slam the door shut, this is not a pull up the drawbridge. This is simply an issue of control, not a saying, you know, we're going to stop everybody coming. And you know, it's of note that I made the first speech on that to the CBI, and then the second comment after a visit with the Chancellor of the City, and people begin to notice that. And I made similar comments. I haven't got quite so much coverage with respect to Mr. Lefroy's comments when talking to Universities UK, the various universities individually themselves, vice chancellors, presidents of royal academies and so on. So it is plain to me that we need to be sensitive about that. It's really an issue for the Home Office to deal with. But my issue on it at the moment is managing the expectations of people. They understand this is not, you know, this is going to be in the national interest the way we run this policy.
it is and it isn't about the Home Office. There's wider issues. We've spoken to a number of employers in different parts of the country, and by and large, what they've said to us is it doesn't matter about the type of business, and it's not about highly skilled workers. Yeah. A lot of companies have expanded their workforce because their businesses have expanded. Yeah. And they've taken people in from the European Union not to take the jobs of British workers, but because they have more work to do. They're anticipating that continuing. So accordingly, because of the importance of migration in the whole referendum issue, and will migration and the ease of movement and issues around that be part of the discussions that you will be having in order to make sure that the needs of the economy can be fulfilled and that the determination on numbers will not drive everything in the negotiations?
No, it won't. And I mean, I suspect, Mr. Burt, that the issue on migration will be one of principle, free movement versus control, rather than numbers in the conversations, which is why we went to the free trade option rather than, and therefore access to single market rather than single market membership. So that's what I suspect. But it is plain to me that we have to run our subsequent policy to meet all the economic interest. And bear in mind, just as an aside here, I come from the north of England, this is not just an economic issue, it's also a social issue, housing, all the other things that go with it. But it is plain to me that we have to do that. And I have said in terms, and again I was criticised for it, that this applies not just to scientists and bankers and so on, it also applies to seasonal workers in agriculture and so on. Now the aim of the government, as the Prime Minister has made plain, she's an ex-Home Secretary, is to bring down the net migration numbers. But it won't be done in a way that damages the economy.
Right. So there are nuances around free movement and movement of workers which fulfills the aim of taking back control but allows a process which assists the economy. And just lastly, in relation to EU citizens here, if of course the negotiations run all the way to the end and it becomes a typical European 5 minutes to midnight, there is the possibility that uncertainty continues in all that time. Would be your very clear determination, and do you get the sense from your colleagues abroad that they really do want to end that uncertainty right at the beginning of the process?
Yes, I mean, this is a very contentious issue, of course, and I understand the concerns of people on the other side of the argument to me, but let me just describe where the policy's got to so far and what the reflections on it have been. The aim is to take the whole package, EU and British citizens together, in one entity, and I think all except one of the meetings I've had since the White Paper with foreign ministers it's come up spontaneously as the first issue, and in that one it was the second issue. So in all of them it's come up in the first two issues. They are concerned about their own citizens properly. They recognise the complementarity of the requirements. They understand our position. They agree with us, and it is notable that the sort of noises in Brussels also reflect that. So in that respect, the Prime Minister's approach on this appears to be working. Now, the issue comes, however, this is not really so much about the hard fact of what will happen as people's fears. And what I will intend to do, if there is something, a technical issue which holds up the actual detailed resolution, what I will try to do, and I think I will succeed, is I'll try to get an exchange of letters which makes absolutely plain what we think the outcomes will be and should be, and we are determined to make. So we get both sides of the negotiation to agree that. That's what I'll aim for, as ever. I'm being ambitious, but I think in this case, actually, I think the ambition is very, very likely to be met.
Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Just on the net migration point, given the government's policy, I think the latest figure is 273,000. To get down to the tens of thousands, you need to take about 170,000 off that total. Is it your anticipation that that would come more from the rest of the world as opposed to the EU, or the other way around, given what you said about there not being a sudden reduction because of the needs of business?
I don't know, Chairman. I mean, the aim, remember, I've said, the aim is to have a humane policy, but one which meets the needs of the economy. If it turns out, I mean, somebody speculated a work permit system, if it turns out to be that, it'll be driven by that. And so I imagine it'll be demand rather than differentiating between A and B depending on where they came from.
Okay.
But that's surmise on my part.
Okay.